Hi, my name is Valeria Martinez, and this is my disease project on anthrax. I'll be covering a number of topics, including history, pathogenesis, virulence factors, who or what it infects, the ways that it infects people, and additionally, some more recent outbreaks of anthrax. So the causative agent of anthrax is Bacillus anthracis, and this bacteria, as you can see in this image of a gram staining of Bacillus anthracis, is a gram-positive, rod-shaped, and chain-forming bacteria. However, what you can't see in this image are what I think the most important part of the bacteria are, and that is the bacterial spores. So Bacillus anthracis is usually found in dirt, and the spores can lay absolutely dormant for up to almost over 10 years until they're ingested, and that is when they reactivate. So it's primarily zoonotic because it is found in dirt, so it only secondarily infects humans. Animals that are most likely to eat it are herbivores because they are eating grass and coming into close contact with dirt and ingesting some dirt. So cattle and sheep, a lot of sheep tend to be carriers of anthrax, and once they ingest the anthrax, it reactivates and spreads everywhere. The taxonomy of Bacillus anthracis, and yep, it's pretty self-explanatory. The genus is Bacillus and the species is Anthracis. Additionally, here's an image of Bacillus anthracis grown on a plate, which is pretty cool looking, actually. Now we can get into some of the pathogenesis of Bacillus anthracis. So once ingested, again, the spores are activated and they begin to reproduce. They produce protective antigen, lethal factor, and edema factor, which combine to form lethal toxin and edema toxin. So as we can see, the protective antigen binds to receptors on cells, and once that happens, either lethal factor or edema factor will join to form either lethal toxin or edema toxin, respectively. They paralyze the neutrophils, which allows anthrax to flow freely around the body. It also causes swelling and inhibition of phagocytosis of the bacteria, and it causes a lot of cell death. And eventually, it'll cause a fatal buildup of fluid around the lungs, brain hemorrhagic meningitis, which ultimately, most of the time, untreated, leads to death. So there are also many ways that anthrax kind of infects. There's cutaneous anthrax, which has about a 20% mortality rate, and this occurs when anthrax spores get into a cut or scrape, and usually this happens to people who handle infected animals or infected animal products. So again, those people who are working in lines of work that they deal with wool, such as especially with sheep, the spores really stick onto the wool. Tanneries and things like that, where they can come into contact with spores and it'll get into a cut or scrape that they have and they get cutaneous anthrax. It presents itself normally as a group of small or itchy blisters, but most notable of the symptoms of cutaneous anthrax is a painless sore, commonly around the face, hands, neck, or arms, that has a very, very coal, almost dark black center. We've also seen injection anthrax, which has about a 30% mortality rate, and this one's very rarely seen. We've actually only ever seen it in Europe and among heroin users. There were 3 cases in Germany in 2012 and a small number in other parts of Europe, and this happens among intravenous drug users where the needle that they use somehow is infected with anthrax and they get a sort of cutaneous anthrax that is deeper under the skin or the muscle because of the injection. We also see inhalation anthrax, which is possibly the most dangerous. It actually is. It is the most dangerous form of an anthrax infection, and it's the most widely known. It has an almost 100% mortality rate untreated, and it occurs when a person breathes in anthrax spores, and it's very common. Well, when you come into contact with anthrax spores, breathing them in is really easy. They're microscopic. You're not going to see them. So, happens a lot innocently to people who work in wool mills, slaughterhouses, and tanneries, again, when they're coming into contact with animal products or animals that have these spores on them, and they inhale them and they get inhalation anthrax. It starts in the lymph nodes and eventually it'll spread to your entire body. You get fevers, chills, heavy sweats, a lot of vomiting, stomach pains, headache, and if it's left untreated, you will get hemorrhagic meningitis, most likely, fluid buildup around your lungs, and it will cause death, most likely, if it's left untreated. There's also gastrointestinal anthrax, which has a over 50% mortality rate, and it happens when a person consumes raw or undercooked meat from an infected animal. And this would happen most likely, or has happened most likely, to people who work on farms and who eat their own animals, and they don't know that the animal is infected with anthrax. They'll undercook the meat and get gastrointestinal anthrax. It affects mainly the upper gastrointestinal tract, so the esophagus and the stomach. So you'll get swelling in your neck and in your neck glands, sore throat, hoarseness, pain when swallowing, but also you'll get bloody vomiting and even bloody diarrhea that will come along with that as well. So here you can see an image of a brain of a person who died due to inhalation anthrax, and you can see the black sort of surface around it and the grayish coloring of the brain, and that's due to hemorrhagic meningitis. Then also, next to that, we see one of those skin lesions that I was talking about due to cutaneous anthrax, and that is actually where anthrax gets its name. It comes from the Greek word anthracus, which means coal, and it's due to these coal-like lesions on the skin when a person gets cutaneous anthrax. So continuing with the history, anthrax has been around for centuries. I mean, there's records of it dating all the way back to ancient Egypt, and in fact, it's believed that the fifth plague of Egypt in Genesis, where all the cattle died, was most likely anthrax. Virgil also is believed to mention it in his third Georgics, where he talks about and he laments about all these cattle that are dying and all these people that are working with these cattle that are dying, and it's believed that that is anthrax. Additionally, Robert Koch, the man who made the postulates for identification of a causative agent, derived those famous postulates from an anthrax prototype when he took blood from dead cows and examined the rod-shaped bacteria that was in the blood, and then infected it, and then infected mice with it, and eventually they died as well. And he identified the causative agent of anthrax, which is pretty cool. So we've already talked about how deadly anthrax is, and it was actually the preferred bioweapon of the Soviet Union. So they knew how deadly it was. Most people wouldn't see doctors within the first days of infection because of the similarity between the symptoms within the first few days of anthrax and those of like a common cold or the flu, and then it would be too late for them. So that's one of the reasons why they used it. Additionally, it was very easy to produce. You can't see it. It's not like someone's coughing on you where you know you're going to get sick. It's just little spores that eventually you inhale and then you die without treatment. It's paused for a little bit in 1979 because there was this huge lab leak of anthrax. However, it came back later in the 80s with Ken Alabek, who's the main bioweaponeer, and he is still alive. He actually wrote a book about how he created the most virulent strain of anthrax ever synthesized. And at one point in 1978, or in 1987, they were creating up to 2 tons of anthrax a day, simply for mortars, shells, and bombs with anthrax inside. But fear not, now there are treatments for anthrax. So if you were to get anthrax, you would be given the anthrax vaccine absorbed. Um, and then additionally, you would be given an antibiotic. The most recommended one is doxycycline, and you would be given that for at least 60 days. The US government actually has a plan to rapidly distribute all these antibiotics because although it's not contagious from human to human, it is very, very much a threat for bioterrorism. So that is a large concern for the United States government. Bioterrorism is one of the main concerns for the US government when it comes to anthrax, and that's because Bacillus anthracis is considered to be a Tier A biological agent by the CDC, meaning that it is one of the biological agents most likely to be used in a bioterrorist event, and it actually already has been. As you can see, there are some letters in the back addressed to senators, an editor of the New York Post, and even an NBC host, and these are letters from what is now called Amerithrax, or the Amerithrax attacks. Shortly after 9/11 attacks, letters containing anthrax spores were mailed out to U.S. senators and multiple media outlets. So when they opened these letters, anthrax spores would come out, they would inhale it. 22 people contracted inhalation anthrax, and 5 people died, including postal workers, which shows how easy the bacteria is to get, even from just touching something with the spores on it, or being close to something with the spores on it. In 2008, the Department of Justice and the FBI finally announced that they were going to bring charges against a Dr. Bruce Ivins. However, before the charges were able to be brought against him, or even before they announced this, the Army microbiologist Dr. Bruce Ivins had already committed suicide. And as you can see, I also have a picture of one of the letters, and it's dated 9/11, and it's like, take penicillin now, this is next. There's other ones that it's like, you have anthrax now, you're gonna die. So there's still speculation as to who actually sent out the letters. Moving forward, outbreaks still occur, but mostly in animals, and most recently, actually, an outbreak of anthrax occurred among some herds of cattle in Wyoming back in September of this year. However, it's pretty easy to control, just moving the animals away from the anthrax-infected site, and moving the infected animals away, and not eating them, or touching them, or getting near them. Most people will not come into contact with anthrax spores in their lives at all, so it's really not a big threat in anyone's daily lives, at least here in the United States and in most developed countries. So that's all I have for today. Here are my references, and I hope you guys enjoyed learning some more about anthrax. Thank you.